It starts quietly, so quietly that most people miss it. You walk into a room and nothing changes. No tension, no relief, just space. You don't feel the need to announce yourself. You don't rush to fill the silence. You notice the pauses before other people speak, the moments where sound could exist but doesn't. Silence feels familiar to you. Not heavy, not dramatic, just normal. You learned early how to sit inside it, how to make yourself smaller without feeling like you were disappearing, how to stay. Adult near you is busy in a way that isn't loud. Their body is present, their attention isn't. They nod, maybe, or they don't. You wait a moment longer than you should. You watch their face. You notice how their eyes don't quite meet yours, how the room keeps moving as if nothing was said. Something in you adjusts. You try again another time. Different words, softer tone, same result. No one tells you to stop talking. No one tells you to be quiet. There's no rule spoken out loud. But you feel it. You feel how the air shifts when you speak, how things get awkward, how your words seem to add weight instead of clarity. So you begin to pay attention. You start listening more than talking. You learn when to pause, when to wait, when to let the moment pass without adding yourself to it. And slowly, without deciding to, you notice something important. When you stay quiet, things feel smoother. People seem calmer. The room feels safer. Nothing improves when you speak, but nothing gets worse when you don't. And slowly, this way of being becomes familiar, reliable, safe. You learn how to stay in the background without feeling absent, how to take up less space without disappearing completely, how to be present without being loud. It works. So you keep going. You keep becoming someone who doesn't ask, someone who doesn't interrupt, someone who doesn't make things harder by speaking at the wrong time. And before you realize it, being quiet isn't something you do anymore. It's who you are. There is a name for this, not to label you, just to acknowledge what happened. Psychologists sometimes call it learned self-erasure. It's what develops when a child understands that taking up space comes with a cost, when quiet becomes a way to stay connected, when silence feels safer than expression. The name doesn't change anything. It simply makes visible what was already there. You might notice how hard it is to say what you need, not because you don't know, but because asking still feels like taking up too much space. So you wait. You adjust. You tell yourself it's not that important. You might apologize before you speak, not for being rude, just for existing in the conversation. You soften your tone. You add disclaimers. You make sure no one feels disrupted by your presence. You carry a quiet sense of being a burden, even when no one has treated you like one, even when people care. There's a feeling that your needs add weight, that closeness requires restraint, that wanting too much risks pushing people away. When conflict appears, you don't always engage. You pull back. You disappear emotionally. You give space before anyone asks for it, because distance feels safer than disagreement. Silence feels like control. In relationships, you're often described as easy, understanding, flexible. You don't make demands. You don't rock the boat. You adapt without complaint. But inside, there's a quiet cost, resentment that never fully forms into anger, needs that stay half-felt, a sense that intimacy requires self-restraint. You might withhold your emotions, even from people you trust. Not intentionally, it just feels unnatural to let everything show. You've learned how to process things on your own, how to sit with feelings quietly, how to keep the deeper parts contained. And over time, this becomes your normal. You function well, you're reliable, you're steady. But there's a subtle loneliness that comes from always being the one who adapts, from always being the one who doesn't ask, from being present without being fully seen. This isn't just how you were as a child, it's how you move through the world now. Staying quiet wasn't a flaw. It wasn't a lack of courage. It wasn't something missing in you. It was awareness. You noticed what the environment could handle. You sensed what emotions had room to exist and which ones didn't. You learned very early how to read the emotional temperature of a room and adjust yourself accordingly. That kind of awareness doesn't come from weakness. It comes from paying attention. Silence became a way to stay connected without creating disruption, a way to remain close without becoming a problem, a way to protect relationships that felt fragile. This wasn't about shrinking, it was about surviving an emotional landscape where expression felt risky. You didn't choose quiet because you lacked something. You chose it because, at the time, it made sense. And understanding that matters. You learned to disappear without anyone noticing, not because you wanted to, but because it felt safer that way. You were quiet because speaking didn't bring comfort, because expressing yourself didn't bring closeness, because staying small kept the room steady. You weren't trying to be good, you were trying to belong. No one sat you down and explained how to take up space. No one showed you that your voice could exist without consequences. So you figured it out on your own, the only way a child can. You watched, you adjusted, you learned when to pull back. And you did it well. You did it so well that people stopped noticing how much you were holding in. They saw calm, not caution, maturity, not self-restraint. But that child inside you never stopped paying attention, never stopped checking the room before speaking, never asking quietly, "Is it safe now?" You were quiet because it felt protective, because silence didn't ask for more than the environment could give, because it kept you close to the people you needed, even when closeness came with conditions. You didn't know that something was missing, you only knew what worked. And what worked was staying still, listening more than speaking, being present without asking to be held. That child didn't need to be corrected, they needed to be understood. They needed someone to notice how carefully they were surviving, how much awareness it took to stay quiet in a world that didn't always have room for their feelings. So if you feel a heaviness here, let it be gentle, not overwhelming, just honest. Because that child wasn't weak, they were attentive, they were adaptive, they were doing the best they could with what they sensed was available. And for the first time, you're allowed to see them, not to fix them, not to change them, just to recognize how much they carried in silence. You don't have to do anything with this. There's no conclusion to reach, no decision to make. Nothing is being taken from you here, and nothing is being asked of you. You don't need to become louder. You don't need to explain yourself differently. You don't need to reclaim anything or redefine who you are. It's enough to understand why silence once mattered, why it felt protective, why it helped you stay connected when connection felt uncertain. That understanding doesn't erase the past. It doesn't rush the present. It simply gives you context. You're not broken for being quiet. You weren't failing to speak. You were responding.